The entire restaurant went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Adrian Cross, the man who owns half the city, just took one bite of the stew and froze. He didn't chew. He didn't swallow. He just stared at the plate with eyes that looked like broken glass. The head chef was smirking, already counting his bonus, thinking he had impressed the billionaire. Then Adrian stood up, his voice shaking with a rage that terrified everyone, and asked the one question that would change everything. Who made this dish? The chef stepped forward to take credit, but Adrian pointed a trembling finger at the back of the room, at the trembling waitress holding a dirty rag. What happened next exposed a lie 10 years in the making. The kitchen of the Sapphire Room was less of a culinary sanctuary and more of a war zone. It was widely considered the most exclusive dining establishment in New York City, a place where a single appetizer cost more than most people's monthly rent. But for Sophie Bennett, it was a prison built of stainless steel and verbal abuse. Sophie was 24, with tired eyes and hands roughened by harsh detergents. She wasn't a chef. She wasn't even a sous chef. She was a runner, the lowest rung on the ladder, tasked with ferrying plates, scrubbing floors, and peeling potatoes until her fingers bled. She was invisible. "Move it, Bennett! You're moving like a cow in mud!" The voice boomed across the kitchen, causing Sophie to flinch. Chef Roland, a man whose ego was only eclipsed by his waistline, stood at the pass, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty towel. Roland was the face of the Sapphire Room. He had 3 Michelin stars, a best-selling cookbook, and a reputation for genius. He was also a fraud. "I'm sorry, chef," Sophie murmured, keeping her head down as she balanced a tray of dirty dishes. The floor was slippery near the walk-in. "Excuses are for the poor, Bennett. That's why you'll always be scrubbing my floors," Roland sneered, looking around for approval from his brigade of sous chefs. They laughed on cue. They had to. Roland had blacklisted the last cook who didn't laugh at his jokes. The poor guy couldn't get a job flipping burgers in Jersey now. Sophie didn't reply. She walked to the dish pit, her heart burning with a quiet, suppressed fire. What Roland didn't know, what no one knew, was that Sophie Bennett was a prodigy. She had grown up in her grandmother's countryside kitchen in Lyon, learning to balance acidity and fat before she could ride a bike. She had a palate that could distinguish between basil grown in shade versus basil grown in direct sunlight. Late at night, when the kitchen was empty and the staff had gone home, Sophie would sometimes stay behind. She would take the discarded scraps, the carrot tops, the beef trimmings, the bruised tomatoes, and she would cook. She would make stocks that tasted like liquid gold and sauces that could make a grown man cry. Then she would pour it all down the drain, wash the pot, and leave. It was her secret, her therapy. On this particular Tuesday, the atmosphere in the kitchen was tighter than a violin string. The general manager, a nervous man named Greg, who sweated through his suits, burst through the swinging doors, his face pale as a sheet. "Listen up!" Greg hissed, his voice cracking. "Cancel all existing tickets. Clear the floor. We have a code black." The kitchen stopped. Even the sizzling pond seemed to quiet down. A code black meant one thing: a VIP so important, so powerful, that the restaurant essentially became their private dining room. "Who is it?" Roland asked, adjusting his toga, feigning confidence though his hand trembled slightly. "The mayor, the governor." Greg shook his head, looking terrified. "Bigger. It's Adrian Cross." A collective gasp went through the kitchen. Adrian Cross wasn't just a billionaire, he was a shark. He was the CEO of Cross Holdings, a conglomerate that had recently acquired the building the Sapphire Room was located in. Rumor had it that Cross was looking to liquidate the asset. He was known for walking into businesses, finding a single flaw and shutting them down overnight. He was cold, calculated, and had zero tolerance for mediocrity. "He's here to decide if he renews our lease," Greg whispered. "If tonight isn't perfect, we are all unemployed by tomorrow morning." Roland swallowed hard. I will prepare the tasting menu. My signature foie gras, the truffle lobster." "No," Greg interrupted. "His assistant just called. He doesn't want the tasting menu. He wants one dish. He said he wants the shepherd's solace." Roland blinked. "The what?" "The shepherd's solace," Greg repeated. "It's a rustic lamb stew, old-world recipe, very specific." Roland scoffed, his arrogance returning to mask his fear. "A stew? He comes to a 3-star restaurant for peasant slop? Fine. If the billionaire wants stew, I will give him the greatest stew he has ever tasted. I will elevate it. I will modernize it." In the back, near the dish pit, Sophie froze. The shepherd's solace. It wasn't a standard stew. It was a very specific, obscure dish from the southern provinces of France, heavily reliant on a specific blend of herbs, savory, marjoram, and a hint of lavender, and a slow-cooking technique that took hours. It wasn't something you could modernize with foam and liquid nitrogen. It was a dish about memory. She looked at Roland, who was already barking orders to fetch the most expensive cuts of Wagyu beef instead of the traditional lamb shoulder. "He's going to ruin it," Sophie whispered to herself. "What did you say, Bennett?" Sophie jumped. One of the line cooks, a jagged-looking man named Vinny, was glaring at her. "Nothing," she said quickly. "Just getting more soap." But she knew. As she watched Roland frantically grabbing truffle oil and gold leaf, she knew disaster was coming. Adrian Cross wasn't looking for gold leaf. He was looking for something real, and the Sapphire Room was about to serve him a plate of expensive lies. The dining room was empty, save for one table in the center. The lights were dimmed, casting long shadows across the velvet carpet. Sitting there, looking at his phone with an expression of utter boredom, was Adrian Cross. He was younger than people expected, perhaps 32, with sharp features and eyes the color of steel. He wore a suit that cost more than Sophie's entire life earnings. He didn't look like a man about to enjoy a meal. He looked like a judge waiting to deliver a death sentence. Back in the kitchen, chaos reigned. "More butter! I said more butter!" Roland screamed, throwing a metal spoon across the room. It clattered loudly against the stainless steel counter, missing Sophie's head by inches. The stew was bubbling in a copper pot. Roland had decided to deconstruct it. He was searing perfect cubes of Wagyu beef separately, creating a foam out of potato, and a reduction sauce that was so thick with red wine and truffle oil it looked like motor oil. "It lacks something," Roland muttered, tasting the sauce and grimacing. "It's too bitter. Add sugar. Add cream." Sophie watched from the corner, clutching her mop. Every instinct in her body was screaming, "Don't add sugar. It needs acid to cut the fat. It needs a drop of vinegar and a pinch of orange zest, not sugar." "Chef?" a sous chef stammered. "Mr. Cross is asking how much longer. He's been waiting 40 minutes. "Perfection takes time," Roland roared. "Plate it, now!" They assembled the dish. It looked beautiful, aesthetically. It was a work of art. 3 cubes of meat, a smear of puree, a cloud of foam, and edible flowers arranged with tweezers. It looked like a 3-star dish. But Sophie knew it didn't look like the shepherd's solace. Greg, the manager, took the plate with trembling hands. "Pray for us," he whispered, and walked out through the swinging doors. The kitchen fell silent. The staff gathered near the door, peering through the small circular window to watch the verdict. Roland stood with his arms crossed, sweating profusely, trying to look confident. "He'll love it," Roland said, his voice high-pitched. "It's genius. I used A5 Wagyu." Sophie found herself moving closer to the window, standing on her tiptoes behind the line cooks. She saw Greg place the plate in front of Adrian Cross. The billionaire looked down at the plate. He didn't pick up his fork immediately. He stared at the artistic smear of sauce and the edible flowers. A frown creased his forehead. "He's admiring the presentation," Roland whispered. Adrian picked up his fork. He took a small piece of the meat, dipped it in the sauce, and placed it in his mouth. The kitchen held its breath. Adrian chewed once, twice. Then he stopped. He spat the meat into his napkin. Roland's face went grey. Adrian Cross stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't flip the table. He simply dropped the napkin on the plate, looked at Greg, and said something that made Greg recoil physically. Greg came running back into the kitchen, his eyes wide with panic. "He hates it. He says it tastes like pretentious garbage. He says he gives us one more chance." "One more chance?" Roland gasped. "He says he wants the dish made correctly. No foam, no wagyu, no truffle oil. He wants the stew his grandmother used to make, and if he doesn't get it in 20 minutes, he's evicting the restaurant tonight. He'll pull the lease." I don't know his grandmother," Roland shouted, throwing his hands up. "I don't know what he wants. This is impossible. The man is a lunatic." Roland began to hyperventilate. The kitchen staff looked at each other in terror. They were all about to lose their jobs because the head chef couldn't cook a rustic stew. Roland grabbed a bottle of cooking sherry and took a massive swig, leaning against the counter, defeated. "It's over. Pack it up. I'm not cooking for this Philistine anymore." The kitchen dissolved into murmurs of despair. Sophie looked at the clock. 20 minutes. She looked at the fresh produce sitting on the prep table. She saw the lamb shoulder that Roland had ignored. She saw the carrots, the onions, the fresh herbs. She remembered the recipe, her grandmother's recipe. It was the same one. The shepherd's solace wasn't a secret billionaire recipe. It was a peasant dish from the old country. Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. If she stepped forward, she could be fired. Roland would destroy her. But if she didn't, the restaurant would close, and everyone, including her friend Maria, who had 3 kids, would be out on the street. She tightened her grip on her apron. "I can do it," a small voice said. The kitchen was so loud with panic that no one heard her. "I can do it," Sophie shouted, her voice ringing clear and sharp. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at the girl with the mop bucket. Roland looked at her with bloodshot eyes, a sneer forming on his lips. "You? The cleaner? Get back to the toilets, Bennett." "I know the recipe," Sophie said, stepping forward, her fear replaced by a strange, cold calm. "I know exactly what he wants. He wants the lamb braised in cider, not wine. He wants the carrots kept whole, not pured, and he wants the secret ingredient." Roland laughed, a cruel barking sound. "Secret ingredient? There is no secret ingredient, you stupid girl." "There is," Sophie said, walking past the line cooks who parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked right up to Roland's station. "It's star anise, just 1 pod. It cuts the richness of the lamb." Roland stared at her. He looked at the clock. 15 minutes left. He looked at his ruined wagyu. He looked at the terrified staff. "Fine," Roland spat, stepping back and gesturing to the stove with a mocking bow. "Go ahead. Cook. When he hates it, I'll tell him it was the cleaning girl who poisoned him. It will be the perfect excuse to fire you." Sophie didn't waste a second. She tied her hair back tighter. She washed her hands. And then she began to dance. For the next 18 minutes, the kitchen of the Sapphire Room witnessed a miracle. Sophie Bennett didn't move like a frantic amateur. She moved with the economy and grace of a master. She grabbed the pressure cooker, the only way to tenderize the meat in time. She seared the lamb chunks in hot fat until they were perfectly browned, the smell instantly filling the air with a rich, savory promise. She didn't measure anything. Her hands knew the weight. A handful of chopped onions, a smash of garlic, a bundle of thyme tied with string. She tossed them into the pot, deglazing the fond with apple cider vinegar and a splash of brandy. Roland watched from the corner, his arms crossed, waiting for her to fail. "Too much heat," he muttered. "She's burning the garlic." She wasn't. She added the stock, the carrots, and finally, the single-star anise pod. She sealed the pressure cooker. While the meat cooked under high pressure, she prepared the side. Not a foam, but a simple, buttery polenta, whipped until it was light as air. The kitchen staff watched in awe. They had never seen the cleaner touch a pan. They realized with a dawning sense of shame that she held a knife better than any of them. 5 minutes left. Sophie released the steam from the pressure cooker. A cloud of aromatic vapor hit the room. It smelled like home. It smelled like comfort. Even Roland's nostrils flared involuntarily. She opened the lid. The sauce had thickened perfectly. The meat was falling apart. She tasted it. It was good. But it needed one last thing. She reached into her pocket. She always carried a small pouch of sea salt, mixed with dried lemon peel, her own blend. She sprinkled a pinch over the stew. It woke the flavors up, making them sing. "Plate it," she said softly. Unlike Roland, she didn't use tweezers. She ladled the stew into a wide, shallow bowl over the polenta. It looked rustic. It looked messy in a way that promised warmth. It didn't look like a Michelin star dish. It looked like dinner. Greg rushed in. "Time's up. Do we have it?" Sophie slid the bowl onto the pass. She wiped the rim with a clean cloth. "Take it," she said. Roland stepped forward, grabbing the ticket. "I'll take it out. If it works, I supervised it. If it fails, it's yours." "No," Greg said firmly, surprising everyone. "Sophie brings it." "What?" Roland shrieked. "She's a waitress. She's wearing a dirty uniform." Mr. Cross asked to see the person who cooked it if it's good. If it's bad, he's walking out anyway. "Sophie, take off the apron. Put on a clean jacket. Go." Sophie's hands trembled. She quickly shed her dirty cleaning smock and borrowed a clean white chef's jacket from one of the line cooks. It was 2 sizes too big for her. She rolled up the sleeves. She picked up the bowl. It was heavy. She walked through the swinging doors, leaving the noise of the kitchen behind. The dining room was silent. Adrian Cross was waiting. He looked even angrier than before. He was checking his watch, ready to leave. Sophie approached the table. She felt like she was walking to the gallows. She placed the bowl gently in front of him. "The shepherd's solace, sir," she whispered. Adrian looked at the bowl. He paused. Visually it was correct. No foam, no flowers. Just meat, sauce, and steam. He looked up at Sophie. He didn't see a famous chef. He saw a girl with flour on her cheek and a jacket that didn't fit. He narrowed his eyes. "You cooked this?" he asked, his voice skeptical. "Yes, sir." "We'll see." He picked up his spoon. He scooped up a piece of lamb and some polenta. He brought it to his lips. Sophie held her breath. Behind the kitchen door window, 20 faces were pressed against the glass, watching. Adrian put the spoon in his mouth. He closed his eyes. 1 second passed. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. He didn't move. He sat there, eyes closed, completely frozen. Sophie's heart stopped. Did I put too much salt? Is it terrible? Then she saw it. A single tear leaked out from Adrian Cross's left eye and rolled down his cheek. He opened his eyes. They weren't cold anymore. They were wide, vulnerable, and shocked. He looked at the bowl. Then he looked at Sophie, with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. I'm Sophie Bennett, sir. I'm just a runner." Adrian stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He slammed his hand on the table. "Liar!" he shouted. The kitchen door burst open. Roland came running out, thinking the game was up. "Mr. Cross, I apologize. This incompetent girl interfered." "Shut up!" Adrian barked at Roland without looking at him. He kept his eyes locked on Sophie. "You are a liar," Adrian said to Sophie, his voice shaking. "You are not just a runner, because there are only 2 people in the world who knew how to make this dish exactly this way. One was my mother, who died 15 years ago." He leaned in closer, his eyes searching hers. "And the other was the man who taught her, a man named Thomas Bennett." Sophie gasped. "Thomas, that was my father." The silence that followed was heavier than the food. Roland's jaw dropped. "Your father?" Adrian's face went pale. "Thomas Bennett was the greatest chef I ever knew. He disappeared 10 years ago, after his restaurant was destroyed by a scandal. They said he stole recipes. They said he was a fraud." Adrian turned slowly to look at Roland. His eyes were no longer vulnerable. They were burning with a terrifying realization. "Roland," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You worked for Thomas Bennett, didn't you? Before you became famous?" Roland began to sweat. I, strictly as a junior sous chef, a long time ago." "My father didn't steal recipes," Sophie said, her voice gaining strength for the first time in years. She glared at Roland. "He was framed. His recipe book went missing the same week he was fired, the same week Roland opened his first restaurant." Adrian looked from Sophie to Roland. He looked at the stew, the undeniable proof of a legacy that had been stolen. "Is that true, Roland?" Adrian asked. "Did you write the menu of this restaurant, or did you steal a dead man's book?" "This is preposterous," Roland stammered, backing away. "You trust the word of a cleaning girl over a 3-star chef?" "I trust my palate," Adrian said coldly. "And this dish? This contains a secret ingredient. Star anise. It's not in any French cookbook. It was my mother's addition. She only told Thomas." Adrian stepped toward Roland. "Tell me the secret ingredient in the sauce, Roland. Right now." Roland froze. He looked at the bowl. Cumin. Nutmeg." "Get out," Adrian said. "What?" "Get out of my building. You're fired, and I'm going to make sure every restaurant in this city knows you're a thief." Roland looked around wildly, but the staff were now entering the dining room, looking at him with disgust. He threw his toque on the floor and stormed out, cursing. Adrian turned back to Sophie. The anger vanished from his face, replaced by gratitude. "I've been looking for this taste for 15 years, he said softly. "I bought this building, hoping to find a chef who could replicate it. I never thought I'd find the daughter of the man who created it." He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Please," the billionaire said to the waitress. "Sit down. We have a lot to discuss." The restaurant was officially closed for the night, but the lights in the center of the dining room remained bright. The staff had been sent home, paid for a full shift by Adrian Cross himself, leaving only Greg, the nervous manager, hovering in the shadows near the bar, and the 2 figures seated at table 5. Sophie Bennett felt like she was in a dream, or perhaps a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. 20 minutes ago, she had been scrubbing grime off the floor near the deep fryer. Now, she was sitting opposite the most powerful man in New York, watching him scrape the bottom of a bowl she had prepared. Adrian Cross placed his spoon down with a sigh of genuine contentment. For the first time since he had walked in, his shoulders relaxed. The shark-like intensity was gone, replaced by a quiet, brooding sorrow. "My mother had cancer," Adrian said suddenly, breaking the silence. He didn't look at Sophie. He looked at the empty bowl. It was aggressive. Towards the end, the chemotherapy destroyed her taste buds. Everything tasted like metal to her. She stopped eating. She was withering away before my eyes. Sophie listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She knew this story, though from a different perspective. "I was 17, Adrian continued. "I felt helpless. We had all the money in the world, but I couldn't buy her an appetite. Then one evening a man came to our house. He wasn't a celebrity chef then, just a quiet man who ran a bistro downtown. He brought this stew." "My father," Sophie whispered. "Yes, Thomas Bennett. He told my mother that the star anise and the cider would cut through the metallic taste. He sat with her and fed her himself. It was the first time she had finished a meal in months. She lived for another year after that, and I believe it was because that food gave her strength. It gave her joy." Adrian finally looked up, his steel-grey eyes locking onto Sophie's. "When your father's scandal broke, I was away at university. By the time I came back to take over the company, he was gone, disgraced, ruined. And Roland, that parasite, was rising to fame using my mother's favorite dishes." Sophie felt a lump form in her throat. "Roland was my father's sous chef. When Dad got sick with stress, when he started forgetting things, Roland switched the labels in the pantry. He made customers sick. He called the health inspector anonymously. He framed my father for negligence. And while my father was dealing with the lawsuits, Roland stole the recipe book, the Black Ledger." "The Black Ledger?" Adrian asked, raising an eyebrow. "It was a leather-bound notebook," Sophie explained, her voice trembling with anger. "Dad wrote everything in it. Not just recipes, but his philosophy, his life's work. Roland took it. I know he did. But I could never prove it. We lost the house. We lost everything. Dad died of a heart attack 2 years later, working as a line cook in a diner." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of injustice. Adrian Cross leaned back in his chair. He tapped his fingers on the tablecloth. The cold, calculating businessman was back, but this time he wasn't looking for a target to destroy. He was formulating a plan. "Sophie," he said, his voice firm, "I own this building. I own the lease. As of 10 minutes ago, I fired the executive chef. The Sapphire Room currently has no leader." Sophie looked down. "I'm sure you can hire someone amazing, Mr. Cross. Anyone would kill to work for you." "I don't want anyone," Adrian said. "I want the person who cooked this stew." Sophie's eyes widened. "Me? Sir, I'm a runner. I haven't run a kitchen in ever. I'm 24. The brigade won't respect me. The critics will eat me alive." "Let them try," Adrian said, a dark smirk playing on his lips. "I am not offering you a job as an employee, Sophie. I am offering you a partnership." He pulled a gold fountain pen from his jacket pocket and grabbed a napkin. He began to write rapidly. "I will fund the restaurant. You will be the executive chef. We will rebrand. We will destroy Roland's reputation, not with lawsuits, but with food. We will show the world the difference between a thief and a master." He slid the napkin across the table. It was a crude contract, signed with a scrawl that was worth billions. "Do we have a deal, Chef Bennett?" Sophie looked at the napkin. It was terrifying. It was impossible. It was everything she had ever wanted. She thought of her father, dying broken and shamed. She thought of Roland's smug face. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook, but her signature was bold. "We have a deal," she said. Adrian stood up and extended his hand. "Good. Get some sleep, Sophie. Tomorrow, the war begins." The war, as it turned out, did not begin with a battle in the kitchen. It began on the morning news. Sophie woke up in her small, cramping apartment to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. It was Greg. "Don't turn on the TV!" Greg screamed through the phone. "Don't look at the internet." Naturally, Sophie immediately turned on the TV. There, on the city's most popular morning talk show, sat Roland. He looked devastatingly sympathetic. He was wiping a fake tear from his eye. "It breaks my heart," Roland was saying to the host. "I tried to mentor her. I tried to help poor Sophie. But she's unstable. She was obsessed with me. Last night, she sabotaged the dinner service. She spiked the billionaire's food to get his attention. And Mr. Cross, sadly, fell for the manipulation. He fired me, a 3-star chef, for a dishwasher with a history of mental health issues." The host gasped. "That's terrible, Chef Roland. And you say she stole your recipes?" "Stole?" Roland laughed sadly. "She can't even cook an egg properly." "No, she memorized my recipes by going through my trash. It's stalker behavior, really. I fear for the safety of anyone who eats at that restaurant now." Sophie dropped the remote. The room spun. He was twisting everything. He was using his fame to crush her before she even started. By noon, the backlash was in full swing. The Sapphire Room's social media pages were flooded with hate comments. "Justice for Roland," they read. "Boycott the dishwasher chef." Suppliers called to cancel their orders, citing unforeseen shortages, which Sophie knew was code for "we don't want to cross Roland." She rushed to the restaurant. The kitchen, usually her sanctuary, felt cold and hostile. The staff, the ones who hadn't walked out with Roland, looked at her with doubt. They had seen the news. They were wondering if they were working for a crazy person. The doors swung open and Adrian Cross walked in. He was on his phone, barking orders. "I don't care what the contract says. Buy the supplier. Yes, the whole farm. If they won't sell us carrots, we'll buy the land the carrots grow on. Do it." He hung up and looked at Sophie. She was sitting on a prep table, head in her hands. "He's winning," Sophie said, her voice muffled. "No one will come. They think I'm a stalker." "He is loud," Adrian corrected, walking over to her. "That is not the same as winning. He's scared, Sophie. A lion doesn't roar at a mouse unless the mouse is about to bite him. He has the press. He has the reputation. What do I have?" "You have the truth," Adrian said. "And you have me." He pulled a tablet from his briefcase. "I've arranged a press dinner for Friday night, 3 days from now. I've invited the top 5 food critics in the city, including Elena Vane." Sophie went pale. Elena Vane, the vulture. She destroyed 3 restaurants last month alone. She loves Roland. "Exactly," Adrian said. "If you can convince her, you convince everyone. Roland knows about the dinner. He's going to try to stop it. He's going to play dirty. But we're going to be ready." The next 3 days were a blur of sleepless exertion. With the regular suppliers blocking them, Adrian used his private jet to fly in produce from independent farms in Vermont and seafood directly from the coast. Sophie rewrote the menu. She wasn't going to do fine dining in the way Roland did. She was going to do Bennett dining, honest, robust, flavor-forward food. But Roland wasn't done. On the afternoon of the press dinner, 4 hours before service, the power in the building cut out. The kitchen went pitch black. The hum of the refrigerators died. "What happened?" Sophie cried, fumbling for her flashlight. Greg ran in from the alley. "Someone cut the main line. It's not a grid outage. The wires were severed outside. It was Roland, Adrian growled, his face illuminated by the flashlight beam. He wants to spoil the food. He knows without the fridges, the fish will rot in 2 hours. Sophie looked at the panic in the eyes of her skeleton crew. They were ready to give up. You couldn't cook a Michelin-level dinner in the dark. Then she looked at the gas stoves. They were mechanical. They didn't need electricity to light. They just needed a match. "We don't need electricity," Sophie said, her voice rising in the darkness. "My grandmother cooked on a wood stove for 50 years. We have gas. We have fire. Get the candles from the dining room. All of them." "But the ventilation," a cook worried. "Open the back doors. Open the windows. We're going to cook," Sophie commanded. "Greg, go to the hardware store. Buy 20 bags of ice. We're turning the sinks into coolers. Move." The kitchen transformed. Dozens of candles were lit, casting long, dancing shadows against the stainless steel. It looked like a cathedral of shadows. The heat rose, stifling and intense, but the crew found a rhythm. Sophie moved among them like a general, tasting, adjusting, encouraging. The adversity didn't break them. It bonded them. At 7 p.m. the critics arrived. They walked into a dining room lit entirely by candelabra. "Atmospheric," Elena Vane murmured, scribbling in her notebook. Or a desperate attempt to hide something. They sat down. The service began. The dinner was a high-wire act, performed without a net. In the absence of electricity, the kitchen had transformed into something primal, stripping away the modern crutches of gastronomy. There were no immersion circulators to regulate temperature, no blenders to emulsify sauces, and no overhead lights to inspect the plating. There was only the hiss of gas flames and the flickering golden glow of 100 candles that Greg had scavenged from the dining room. Sophie Bennett moved through the shadows like a conductor in a fever dream. The heat in the kitchen was rising, stifling and intense without the ventilation system. But she didn't slow down. She used a mortar and pestle to crush the basil for the pesto, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud replacing the mechanical whine of a food processor. She whisked the cream by hand in a copper bowl until her forearm burned, refusing to stop until the peaks were perfect. "Service," she whispered, her voice tight. The first course went out. Roasted beet tartar with smoked eels. In the dining room, the atmosphere was accidental magic. The critics had expected a disaster. Instead, they walked into a cathedral of shadows. The candlelight danced on the silverware, casting a soft, forgiving glow over the tables. Elena Vane, the city's most feared critic, took a bite of the tartare. She chewed slowly, her pen hovering over her notebook. She frowned, tapping the paper. It wasn't the reaction of someone disgusted. It was the reaction of someone confused by how simple, yet profound, the flavor was. She whispered to the critic next to her. "It tastes like earth and smoke. It's uncomfortably honest." Back in the kitchen, the pressure was mounting. Sophie was plating the main course, the shepherd's solace. This was the dish that would save them or bury them. She ladled the rich dark stew over the polenta, the steam rising in the cool air. "How are they reacting?" she asked, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her sleeve. "Hard to tell," Greg said, his face pale in the candlelight as he peered through the window. Elena looked skeptical. "She's not writing. She's just staring." Suddenly the spell was broken. The kitchen doors didn't just open, they banged against the walls with a violence that made the candle flames jump. It wasn't a waiter returning with empty plates. It was Roland. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the emergency lights of the hallway, looking like a vengeful spirit. But he wasn't alone. Flanking him were 2 uniformed police officers and a man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit, clutching a briefcase. "Stop everything!" Roland bellowed, his voice booming over the clatter of pans. "Shut it down! Arrest that woman!" The brigade froze. A sous-chef dropped a ladle, the clang echoing like a gunshot. Adrian Cross stepped immediately in front of Sophie, his body forming a shield between her and the intruders. His face was a mask of cold fury. "You are trespassing, Roland. Get out." "I am protecting my intellectual property," Roland screamed, spittle flying from his lips. He pointed a shaking finger at the pot of stew bubbling on the stove. "That recipe. She is cooking my shepherd's solace. I have the copyright. I have the patent pending. Officer, she is serving stolen goods in a commercial establishment. Confiscate the food." The commotion was loud enough to bleed into the dining room. The critics, sensing a story far juicier than a beet tartar, stood up and drifted toward the kitchen doors. Elena Vane stood at the front, her eyes gleaming with delight. This was the drama she lived for. "I have proof!" Roland shouted, waving a legal document in the air. "This is a sworn affidavit that I created this recipe in 2015. She is a fraud." Sophie stepped out from behind Adrian. Her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a decade of suppressed rage. She looked at Roland, then at the confused police officers. "He's lying," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "Prove it," Roland sneered, his confidence soaring as he saw the critics watching. "Where is your proof? Where is your documentation? You have nothing but a sob story and a dirty apron." Sophie looked at Adrian. The billionaire didn't look worried. He looked like a grandmaster who had just baited his opponent into a fatal move. "Actually," Adrian said, his voice cutting through the noise like a razor blade. "We were hoping you would say that, Roland." Adrian snapped his fingers. From the shadows of the dry storage pantry, Greg stepped forward. In his hands, he held an object wrapped in a heavy velvet cloth, treating it with the reverence of a religious artifact. Roland's face went slack. His eyes locked onto the object, and for the first time, genuine terror flickered behind his glasses. Greg placed the object on the stainless steel prep table and unwrapped it. It was a book. An old, black leather notebook, its spine cracked and peeling, the pages swollen with humidity and yellowed by time. "The black ledger," Sophie whispered, the air leaving her lungs. She hadn't seen it in 10 years. It smelled of tobacco and dried thyme, the scent of her father. Where did you get that?" Roland stammered, backing away, his heels skidding on the kitchen tiles. "It was in my safe. It was in my house." "You really should read the fine print of your employment contracts, Roland," Adrian said smoothly, stepping closer to the table. "When you worked for Cross Holdings, you signed a clause that stated any company property kept in private residences is subject to immediate retrieval if theft is suspected. My security team executed a retrieval order an hour ago while you were busy cutting our power lines." Adrian opened the book. The binding creaked in the silence. He turned to a page marked with a pressed, dried rosemary sprig. "Officer," Adrian said, gesturing to the policeman, "please look at the date on this entry for Shepherd's Solace." The officer squinted in the candlelight, leaning over the book. "October 14th, 1998. 1998, Adrian repeated, turning his gaze to Roland, who was now sweating profusely. 15 years before you claim to have invented it. And look at the handwriting, and this note at the bottom." Adrian read the inscription aloud, his voice thickening with emotion. "For my beloved Elara Cross, may this bring you comfort in the dark days. Thomas." The room went deathly silent. Elara was Adrian's mother. The connection was undeniable. The recipe wasn't just food, it was a gift from a dying man to a dying woman, stolen by a greedy one. Elena Vane gasped audible. She stepped fully into the kitchen, ignoring all protocol. She looked at the book, then at Roland, her expression shifting from curiosity to utter disgust. "You fraud," she hissed, writing furiously in her notebook. "You absolute hack." Roland looked around wildly. The police were looking at him with suspicion. The critics were taking photos of the ledger. The kitchen staff were grinning with savage satisfaction. I... Roland tried to speak, but his voice failed him. The lie he had built his empire on had crumbled. "You're done, Roland," Adrian said, closing the book with a definitive thud. "Officer, I'd like to press charges for grand larceny, fraud, and vandalism of my property." The police moved in. As they handcuffed Roland and dragged him out of the kitchen, he screamed obscenities, blaming everyone but himself. But no one was listening. His reign was over. Sophie stood there, trembling. Adrian picked up the book and handed it to her. "It belongs to you," he said softly. She ran her fingers over the cover, tracing the scars in the leather. Tears streamed down her face, but she wiped them away quickly. She looked up at the critics, who were now watching her, not with suspicion, but with a profound, quiet reverence. They knew they were witnessing history. Sophie took a deep breath. She looked at her staff, who were waiting for her command. "We still have a service to finish," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "Table 4 is waiting for their stew." "Yes, chef," the kitchen roared back, louder and prouder than ever before. 6 months later. New York City was blanketed in a layer of pristine white snow, the flakes swirling in the glow of the street lamps. On Fifth Avenue, where most businesses were closing their doors against the biting chill, one establishment was alive with a warmth that seemed to radiate through the glass. The queue outside stretched down the block, wrapping around the corner. People stamped their feet and rubbed their gloved hands together, not with impatience, but with the excited anticipation of pilgrims waiting to enter a sanctuary. The imposing, cold steel signage of the Sapphire Room was gone. In its place hung a modest, hand-carved wooden sign illuminated by a soft golden downlight. The Bennett table. Inside, the transformation was even more profound. The velvet ropes and intimidating shadows were replaced by rustic oak tables, open shelving stacked with jars of preserved lemons and pickled vegetables, and the hum of genuine laughter. The air didn't smell of sterile luxury anymore. It smelled of rosemary, braised lamb, and burnt sugar, the scent of a home that had been missing its family. Sophie Bennett stood at the pass, the captain of this ship. She wore a chef's jacket that was blindingly white, tailored perfectly to her frame. On the breast pocket, embroidered in deep navy thread, were the words, "Executive Chef Sophie Bennett." She wasn't the invisible girl scrubbing floors with a grey rag anymore. She was the heartbeat of the room. "Order in," Sophie called out, her voice clear and melodic, cutting through the din without needing to shout. "2 shepherd's solace, 1 roasted bass, table 7. "Yes, chef," the brigade responded in unison. The response was crisp, respectful, and devoid of fear. There was no screaming here, no flying spoons. Sophie ran her kitchen the way her father had taught her, with discipline born of love, not terror. She watched as the line cooks moved in a synchronized dance, plating the food with care rather than pretension. As the dinner rush began to taper off, the heavy oak doors at the front swung open. A gust of cold wind entered, followed immediately by Adrian Cross. He looked different. The armor of his 3-piece Italian suits was gone, replaced by a thick cashmere sweater and dark jeans. The perpetual scowl that used to etch deep lines into his forehead had smoothed out, leaving a face that looked younger, lighter, and undeniably handsome. He didn't head for the VIP section. There wasn't one anymore. Instead, he walked straight to the kitchen pass, leaning against the counter where he could watch Sophie work. "Full house again," Adrian said, his voice low enough to be intimate amidst the clatter of porcelain. "Greg tells me we're booked out solid until after New Year's." Sophie looked up from inspecting a garnish of fresh thyme. She smiled, and the expression reached her eyes, crinkling the corners. "It's the stew, Adrian. Everyone comes for the story, but they stay for the stew." "It's not just the stew," Adrian corrected gently, his gaze unwavering. "It's the soul of the place. You didn't just renovate a restaurant, Sophie. You performed an exorcism. You brought this building back to life." "We did it," she replied, wiping her hands on a clean side towel. "I couldn't have done any of this without your backing. You took a gamble on a runner." Adrian reached into the inner pocket of his coat. "Speaking of backing, I have something for you. Consider it a graduation present." He slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the stainless steel pass. Sophie hesitated, her heart beating a little faster. She wiped her hands again before picking it up. She slid the document out. It was heavy, legal paper, embossed with the official seal of the city. She scanned the text. Her breath hitched in her throat. "Adrian," she whispered, looking up at him in shock. "This is the deed. To the building. To the land." "I transferred it an hour ago," Adrian said, casually, as if he were discussing the weather. "You own the Bennett table. You own the bricks, the mortar, the kitchen, and the ground it sits on. It's all yours." "I can't accept this," Sophie protested, pushing the envelope back. "This is prime real estate. It's worth millions. We're partners, remember? 50-50. "We were partners," Adrian said, pushing the envelope back toward her firmly. "But a landlord can never truly be a partner. As long as I own the building, there is a power imbalance. I don't want to be the man who holds the lease over your head. I want to be—" He trailed off, searching for the right words. "You want to be what?" Sophie asked softly. "I want to be free of the past, just like you," Adrian said. "This building was just an asset to me. To you, it's a legacy. It's your father's name on the door. It belongs to a Bennett." He looked around the kitchen, then back at her. The intense businessman was gone, replaced by a man who looked hopeful, perhaps even a little nervous. "Besides," he added, a playful glint entering his steel-grey eyes, "I have a new ambition. I'm thinking of applying for a job here." Sophie blinked, caught off guard. "A job? You run a global conglomerate, Adrian. What position could you possibly want?" "I'm a quick learner," he said, leaning closer over the pass, invading her personal space in the most welcome way. "I take direction well. I'm told I make excellent coffee, and I'm very good at washing dishes if the runner gets tired." Sophie laughed, a bright, crystalline sound that seemed to stop the kitchen for a split second. The staff smiled, pretending not to listen, but listening intently. "You're overqualified," she teased, "but good help is hard to find." "Is that a yes, chef?" Sophie looked at the document in her hand, then at the leather-bound book, the black ledger, which now sat in a glass display case near the entrance, open to her father's handwriting. She had cleared his name. She had reclaimed her heritage. And now, standing in front of her, was the man who had helped her find the strength to do it. She realized she didn't just have a restaurant. She had a future. "You're hired," she whispered. Adrian smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that lit up his face. He reached across the pass, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead, and kissed her gently right between the eyes. "Thank you, chef," he murmured against her skin. Outside, the snow continued to fall, turning New York City into a silent, white dreamscape. But inside the Bennett table, the fire was burning bright, the stew was bubbling with the taste of memory, and everything was finally, perfectly right. What a journey. From a mistreated waitress scrubbing floors to the owner of the city's most beloved restaurant, Sophie proved that talent and truth eventually shine through the darkness. She didn't just cook a stew, she cooked up a storm of justice that took down a fraud and healed a billionaire's broken heart. It reminds us that no matter how invisible you feel, your gifts matter. Never let anyone steal your credit or your dreams. If you enjoyed this story of karma, romance, and delicious justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves a good underdog story. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next dramatic tale. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.